Okay, I know the last time I said that was the last video for this car, but I lied. So I made a few changes to this that I figured is worth sharing in this video in case you guys are doing similar modifications to your Madcap. Few little things. So first thing is for this steering rack here that I put on, this Astute aftermarket steering rack. Originally I was using 3 racing 4.3 millimeter ball cups with a 3 millimeter threading. They're aluminum ball cups, or sorry, ball studs with RPM ball cups. And those 3 racing 4.3 millimeter ball studs have a pretty tight fit to these RPM ball cups. Even though these RPM ball cups do work perfectly well on team associated ball studs, which are also 4.3 millimeter diameter. So my guess is the 3 racing 4.3 millimeter ball studs are slightly larger than 4.3 millimeters. Or the team associated ball studs are slightly smaller than 4.3. And that does result in a little bit of bind. So that was causing the steering to not go back to center. And originally I thought maybe I needed a higher torque servo to do it. Even with a high torque servo, if this is binding, you're going to have problems there. So although I do still have those 3 racing 4.3 millimeter aluminum ball studs on the camber link points for both the front and the rear, I changed them out for 4.8 millimeter ball studs for the steering at the bell crank and on the knuckle side, and I replaced the RPM ball cups with Kyosho 4.8 millimeter ball cups. This is much better now. So the steering is much smoother. I don't have to worry about that centering issue that I had before. It was really just a binding problem. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, actually, I'll stay at the front. I mounted the GPM front hex conversion here for this car. I've talked about this little part here in the past. You can find them on eBay. Basically, it's a hex wheel hub with 4x8 millimeter bearings on the inside. And so you throw that on there, and then you put a front hex wheel on there. And then depending on the length of the axle, you may or may not need to put something on the outside. So for instance, if I go over here, and I'll grab my TRX3, and I'll show you the comparison. I do also have it on this car as well, but in a slightly different arrangement. Because on the TRX3, the wheel axle, see I have the same thing here, but the wheel axle is a bit longer, and the threading on the outside is also a bit longer. So if you're going to use this GPM hex, it benefits you to get these 5x10 millimeter thrust bearings and put those on the outside of the wheel, and then you take your wheel nut and you tighten that down. I actually put this on backwards so the nylon locking part is on the inside of the thread, and I have more room to tune this, and you tune it just right so the thrust bearing isn't fully locked down and you get nice free movement. Okay, so that's one way to do it here. But for the Madcap, the axle length is shorter. It's basically an Astute part here, and it's actually the perfect length for this part so that you can just put the wheel onto it and then lock down the lock nut. You may have to back off on the lock nut by maybe an 1/8 of a turn or 1/4 of a turn just to make sure you get free movement of the wheel. And that does mean that the outer surface of the wheel will rub a little bit against the inside surface of the nut here, but no real problems there. Works perfectly fine. Okay, so what that means is I have a whole assortment of B5 wheels from when I used to run my B5 that I can use on this, and it should be perfectly fine. So that's the second piece. Third piece is the pinion. So I talked about using the Charisma slipper clutch for this chassis because the car itself, this gearbox, does not have a slipper clutch integrated into the spur gear. The only way to get an Astute-like chassis with that is to get the TTC gearbox from the Super Astute, but I don't think you can put that on this car and still be classic class legal. So I'm keeping the original gearbox with some modified internals, and running this slipper. Now the problem with this is, even though the Charisma pinion gear, the 24 tooth pinion gear that you can get, is the correct pitch to mate with Tamiya gears, it's only 24 teeth. And if you're going to run a sport tuned motor, it's not a big enough pinion. You need a larger pinion. So you can get them from other brands, but I have these SpeedTech RC pinion gears. They are, what is it, 0.6 mod gear pitch. That's what you need to mate with these Tamiya gears. And I have on here a 26 tooth. This is a 27 tooth. It has a 5mm bore on the inside. And on the 26 tooth, I just chopped off this backside here so that I can mount it straight on, just as you would with, you know, the actual Charisma pinion. So right now I have essentially 2 more teeth on this pinion gear. Makes it a little faster. I do intend on doing the same modification to this one, so I get some tuning window here. But I just wanted you guys to know that this is a way to use a Charisma slipper arrangement without being limited to the Charisma pinion gears themselves, right? You can just get this, get a Dremel, get a cutting wheel, and just lop off the end. It takes a bit, and you have to, you know, get a grinding wheel and grind it down, make sure this backside surface is nice and smooth, so it mates nicely with the slipper pads that go onto this thing. In order to make this fit, though, I did end up having to cut off not the entire motor mount. You can see the plastic motor mount is actually still, or sorry, the motor cover, the plastic is still here, but the piece that comes off, basically like this part that wraps around the pinion, I had to cut that whole thing off because with a 26 tooth pinion, it rubs against the inside of that gear cover. And you can't really run this without a gear cover because this screw here mounts the gear cover on, and the gear cover has like a little spacer on the inside of this part that pushes the spur gear on. Now you could take this off, put a little spacer on the shaft there and put the screw down, but now this whole thing is exposed, and those spur gears are really hard to find. And you know, you can get 3D printed replacements, but I want to try to protect this a little bit more, so I'm going to use this modified gear cover so that there's space for this pinion to run free. Okay, that pretty much does it. And I think that with those changes, I now have a vintage two-wheel drive buggy with a plastic top chassis and some clever steering and suspension modifications and drivetrain mods that should still make it classic legal, but hopefully a very competent two-wheel drive buggy with, you know, good steering, no binding, none of that nonsense. So now that I finally sort of fixed this car, I do plan on bringing this to Vonats with most likely the Tamiya VQS. You know, try them back and forth, see which one works better. But this would be probably my best bet for a two-wheel drive classic chassis. Okay, so next steps. I may keep this body. It's a nice body with some nice decal arrangements here and run some white rims. Or I may do my usual paint scheme and, you know, with the yellow wing, the blue body. We'll see. But otherwise, it's ready to go. So that's it. Thanks for watching.